Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to a video, and today we're going to be building the Catalyst Machine Works Merica. So let's just do a real quick rundown of the components. Obviously we have the frame here with this cool little pod. Just have the little front side brace. The camera, I'll be using the Foxeer Micro Arrow. This guy is really nice. It's only about $20 right now, so that's really cool. Just the standard Hyperlite f4, which is I pretty much always use. No OSD, nothing fancy, just super simple, and it just works well for me, so I just keep using it. We have the Spedix IS30, again, nothing fancy. D-Shot 600, and it's 4-in-1. It works well for me. Got a TBS Unify race, and I'll just be putting on this little TBS cloverleaf with the UFL on there, and then I'll strap out the back. And then in sort of a star of the show is these Brother Hobby R5 2207 2700 kV motors. I did a individual video on these already that I'll leave a link down below. So that's just real quick, let's get right into it. Alright, so first I like to get the motors mounted, so I'm just going to take the included screws. Just going to use a little blue Hobby King Loctite. This stuff works pretty well. I've had it for a long time, really lasts a while. And I'm just going to start putting the screws in. And I think these guys are 7mm screws, which is nice. Yeah, these are 7mm, but because the arms are 5mm stick, you might have to get different screws, especially if your motors only come with 6mm screws. They are not going to fit. So just a little dab of Loctite on there, and you'll be good to go. And because these motors have sort of this little lip here that push the wires down, you don't really want to crush these out of the way. So they're heat shrunk, so they're kind of stiff here. So what I'm going to do is heat this up so it sort of becomes soft again, and then I'll pull them up out of the way so the motor can tighten down without crushing the wires. Just going to heat that up there. And sort of just pull up on it a little bit to reshape it. And it's still going to push them down just a little bit, but that's a lot better, and there'll be less stress on that joint. There's the third one. Don't put them up tight just yet. Make sure you get all of them in first. You can use 2. I know a lot of people do that, but I just prefer to use 4. Doesn't really add hardly any extra weight. So just get that in there, and then make sure a bearing is centered up with the middle of the hole. But if you're using all 4 screws, that's probably not going to be an issue. And tighten them down pretty tight. Obviously, don't go overkill. You're threading into aluminum. So, and especially if your screw is a little bit short, like mine are, because these are 5mm arms, so you only have a little bit gripping into the motor. But that's more than enough there, and that is securely mounted. And then our wires will just run off to the ESC in the middle. Of course, we do have our low profile lock nut that comes with the motor because these shafts are shorter than normal. So I'm just going to put that on there right now to make sure I don't lose these, because I don't have any extra low profile ones. So there we go. Let me do the other 3. Okay, so there we go. I have all 4 motors mounted, and I know it's been a few weeks since I did the initial bench review of these motors, but I'm still really excited to fly these. They just look really nice, and they feel like really nice quality. So next, let's move on to prepping the Foreign One Esc. So the Spedix, they recently started coming pre-tinned from the factory and with 16 gauge leads installed. However, I don't like that because this solder from the factory from China is lead-free, so it's kind of crappy. And these leads, I like to use 14 gauge, not 16, so I have to remove it all anyways. So I wish they wouldn't do that, but I have to remove this, so let's do that. Okay, so the way to get the lead-free stuff off is you have to sort of flush it out. So you have to add new solder on there and then sort of wipe it off, and just keep doing that until it, when it firms up, it's nice and shiny and not dull. So you kind of just have to keep adding in and then wiping it off again and wasting all this solder. And it's just super annoying. I wish they wouldn't pre-tin them. And then for the power leads, you kind of have to do the same thing, although you're going to need higher heat since it's lead-free solder and you have a big wire on there, but you're going to have to probably add a bunch of your own in there and just sort of get everything flowing. These really don't like to come off. So there's that one, and hopefully you can see the kind of joint that it left on the negative here. Hopefully you can tell that it's really dull, and that's going to give you a bad solder joint, and that's just the lead-free solder. So you have to make sure that you wick that away and add in some good solder with some lead and flux in there. Wick away this extra stuff, and be careful because the board is going to be very, very hot now that you've heated it up. Getting rid of all this. And then while we're at it, I'm going to tin the other pads for the Vtx, and then over here for the capacitor. And then up here, the 5 volt. Actually, no, I'm going to leave those. I don't need to tin those. So there's the Foreign One Esc fully ready. Okay, for the next step, we're going to be mounting the ESC. So I just went ahead and took off this middle plate. Just put the screws back so their arms just stay roughly on, so we can have access to that. And I also added a little XT60 pigtail, just some 14 gauge wire and an XT60 and heat shrink. Nothing special here. It's just going to fit here. And then with these slots right here, we're going to be able to secure the power wires with a zip tie, so this won't be pulling on the pads. Normally I use nylon standoffs and screws to attach it. However, recently in a lot of my crashes, all the nylon screws in my stacks have been breaking off. So what I'm going to be doing is just using some M3x6 steel screws. If that'll focus, just some normal screws. These are not going to break. I'm going to be coming up from the bottom, and these are sort of a button head screw, so it's going to be low profile, and the battery pad I add on here will cover that, so that won't be hurting your battery. Just going to run up here into this little nylon standoff right there, and then I'll be able to put the Foreign One on that. That'll keep it down below the plate there, and then that'll give us enough room underneath it to run the battery strap. Okay, just putting the last bottom screw in there, and of course when you're tightening these, don't go super crazy. You're threading into plastic, so very easy to strip, so just get it just a little bit tight. Just keep it snug in there, just like that. There we go. Now the ESC will mount nicely like that. Right on there, nice and secure. Plenty of room underneath for the battery strap. And for the wires, I'm probably going to run them down the end of the arm to here. And then, I'm not sure if I want to run in like this. Yeah, I think I'm going to actually run outside along them because I really want to come from the inside of the ESC like this to get the wires like that. So it might look a little bit less neat, but I'll be able to zip tie the wires down there so that won't look too bad. So let's start cutting them to length. This, you want to leave yourself some slack, obviously, so that looks really nice right there. And just add just a little bit of extra slack before you cut them. It's easier to take wire off than removing it. And that's why Brother Hobby motors are nice, that they give you 160 millimeters of wire, so even pretty much no matter how you run them, you're always going to have a little bit extra, which is way nicer than having to add on these little tiny extensions to reach your 4-in-1 pads. Okay, and of course we're just going to strip and pre-tin these wires. If you can, when tinning stuff, try to not do it over your electronics because there can be a little splatter and that can result in bad things. Okay, the wires are tinned and the pads are nicely tinned from earlier, so I'm just going to run these guys around, get the other ones out of the way, and sort of just roughly put it up here for the soldering. Make sure it goes down nice all the way against the pad. That one is all the way down, but the solder didn't flow all the way through. So I'm just going to tack on a little bit more there and then reflow the whole joint. And that looks way better. Just apply the heat and make sure it flows all the way down and connects. Leave it on for a second and then pull it off, hold it, and then you should be good to go. And of course, close visual inspection to make sure that nothing is bridged. Everything looks good here. Pretty decent joints. I might reflow this middle one. There's just a little bit of solder sticking out, but overall pretty nice. And then these wires we can just zip tie down, and those will sort of stick out of the way and look pretty clean once it's all done. It doesn't look that nice now, but should look pretty good. So let me go ahead and finish other three. Okay, so all of the motor wires are soldered up. You can see that's a pretty nice, clean install, looking good there. and then I just zip tied them down to the arms like that. That'll keep them nice and secure. And I also added the capacitor here that comes with the Spedix ESC. All I did was bend the legs up a little bit so it can sit down like that, so that when the pod comes on here it should fit, although I might have to push it out of the way a little bit more. That's just going to look like that to give you an idea of what it looks like, so that's super nice. So next, normally I mount my receiver underneath. I'm going to be just using an XSR underneath the stack. However, there's not enough room here the way I've set it up, especially with the battery strap going through there. And then the VTX is sort of going to sit in the middle there. The Unify is going to sit in the middle, in the center of this cutout here, and the plate in between them. And then you're going to have the pod here. The flight controller is going to hang down from the bottom. It's going to screw in like that. And then, so there's really no room. I don't know if you can see that. The pod obviously will go up a little bit higher because of the plate, but there's really no room for anything else in there. So actually what I'm going to do, I think, is put this guy on top of the flight controller up in this section, sort of like that. Hide it up in there underneath the camera, and then put it on top of the flight controller, and then you can twist these around and then go into the little antenna tube holes to mount them out the back. I think that'll fit it up in a way. It really would be ideal to use a smaller receiver like an RCAddict, but I just want to use a full size for this. And then the micro camera should still have enough room to sit up here, and then I can just run the wires down. So this is going to be a little bit of a complicated build, kind of annoying probably due to just the constraints of the pod and frame overall, but when you're done it should look really nice and provide a nice lightweight durable racer. So we'll have to see about that. So I'm going to have to put this plate back on to size things up, and then I'm going to work on installing the VTX and running the power cables down to that, as we still do have to wire it into the ESC here. Okay, so let's work on getting the VTX installed next. Slide out. Okay, so I'm just going to cut the heat shrink back just a little bit here so I can expose the UFL, so I can take that off. There we go, and then just carefully pop that little guy off since we will be using this antenna. Click that on. There we go, so we can see where this is going to need to go. If we look at this, is going to be the back here. The antenna is going to need to come out in between the receiver antennas there and stick up out the back and just zip tie there. So it looks like I'm going to have to install the VTX facing this way with the UFL out, because we need the full length of this cable to go up like that. So as for the wires that connect to it with this little harness here, that just pops in that. This is going to go this way. And then the power here, I power this. This is the HV. I just power it directly off of the ESC pads. So I'm going to have to lift these motor wires up because those pads are right underneath here. So this is going to have to come under to there, and then I'm going to leave this long for now, as that's going to have to go up past the flight controller up into the pod to connect to the camera video, as I use the Unify 5V to supply to the camera. And then I also run the VSense wire down to the ESC as well from the camera to get the voltage OSD on the camera. So there's going to be a lot of wires running up and down, but I can just get the wire for this set. Of course, I'm going to leave I'm going to leave a lot of room on this, a lot of wiggle room. Not really any reason to cut it shorter than that. Okay, I have the VTX just soldered in like that, just straight to the battery voltage there. So now we have this wire here, which comes with the ESC, the little breakout cable, which is going to supply 5 volts to our flight controller, have all of our motor signals, and then have one extra VBAT, which I'm probably going to end up running to the camera. That way I don't have to solder to the pads. However, now that we have all this already done, we shouldn't need to touch the ESC anymore. So I'm actually going to go ahead and put on this middle plate so we can start sizing things up. And of course, remember that the little spacers here for the arms on the back, they go underneath to raise the arms up, and on top they go on the bottom or the top to put the arms down a little bit to help give it some cleaner air. Okay, so I had to do a little bit of rearranging to the stack. I was using just these sort of little standoffs here to hold the ESC on. However, that was a little bit too high. It didn't come in contact with the plate. It was fine there. However, I couldn't get these ESC wires to wrap back around underneath. They would have to come out the front. And I really didn't want that because it just looked messy and there's nowhere there. I'd have to cut like a little slit in the front. So what I had to do is get the ESC lowered. So to do that, I just took, instead of the standoffs, I just used a little nut there, and that gives enough room for the battery strap to go under. However, it's very tight in there now because it presses on it, so I had to put that in because you're not going to be able to get a new strap in unless you take that board off, which will be super annoying if you rip a strap. Or you can just use a slightly higher stack, and then you should be able to slide them in and out there. So I did that. Then I also put a little zip tie around the battery leads. They give you a slot for it here. However, it's right on the pads, like it's right there, so I don't think it's going to really offer any stress relief for it. So I really wish this little pad was extended out like 5 millimeters more this way so you can grab the wires and not right at the pads. But of course, depending on the setup, that might actually work fine. So next I'm going to get the Vtx installed into the middle here. I'm not exactly 100% sure what I'm going to do with it. I might just sort of sticky tape it in here because it does fit right down in this little pocket, so I'm probably going to do that. The only problem is the UFL doesn't fit unless I squish it this way, so I'll have to see. Let me go put some epoxy around this UFL here so it stays solid on there. Okay, so I actually decided against the hot glue because once this heats up, that'll melt and then this will become loose again. So what I did was just a simple method of taking a little bit of solder. Hopefully you can see that. And I just soldered the outside of the UFL connector to the ground on the bottom here. It's just, you're just connecting them. It's not connecting anything electrically. It's just ground to ground. That doesn't matter. But now this is soldered in with metal, so this obviously can't move and it's not going to pop off. And the small amount of stress that we'll be putting on it here in the middle and bending up won't pop it off, so we'll be good there. And so now I'm just going to put a little bit of double-sided sticky tape underneath the VTX and stick it to the ESC so that it doesn't flop around inside there. Nothing fancy, it just needs to hold a little bit, and you could probably get away with just leaving it floating in here, but I'd rather have it touch something. So there we go. It's still not very tight in there, but should do well enough. So now that that is all done in there, we're pretty much going to start prepping the pod because we need to get the camera up in there first and then run the wires down to the VTX, and then I can stick the receiver on top of the flight controller, wire that up, then I can put that in there upside down like this, so that way the USB sticks out the side here so you can access it, and then everything else will be able to wire up straight to the bottom of this, and then we can put that on, and then we should be done there. So let me get this camera screwed in, and then we'll start working on the lead from that to go down to the VTX. Okay, so the camera is installed, and it is nice that they do include the correct length screws and washers with the frame to mount this, since the TPU obviously isn't a normal thickness, and that just goes in there, and the camera is real tight, and it will be well protected. Nothing is sticking out there. And I just have the wires running down from that. This is for the voltage sensing for the OSD, and then this is for the power, video, and ground. I'm just going to connect that to the VTX, and I don't want to run, I could run the wires up the front here, but there's sort of slots in the middle in the front, and I just don't want them to be that visible. Trying to make this nice and clean, so I'm actually going to run them towards the back and run the Unify wires out towards the back there and just connect them there. So I'm going to need to see how much wire I need. This gets a little bit fiddly, but of course you want to leave a decent bit of slack here with the pod so you're able to take it off quite easily and you don't get burnt by having too short of wires. So I'm just going to cut that off decently long on both ends. Of course you don't need nearly as high as iron temperature for these little guys. I just have my iron down at 330 Celsius. That's what I usually use for smaller gauge wires, and it would be better to switch to a smaller, more thin tip, but I'm just going to keep using the same big chisel tip. Works fine for me. And get it far enough away that when we melt the joint together, it doesn't prematurely shrink them. Okay, there's that, and now it's just as simple as connecting yellow to yellow for the video, black to black for the ground, and then red to red for the 5 volts coming out of the Unify going into the micro camera. And then we can just put the heat shrink down over it, and then use some kind of heat to shrink these guys down. Okay, there's that, and then we also have the blue wire from the camera, which is for the voltage sensing, and I'm going to connect that to the far left red wire of the ESC here right next to the 4 signals, as that is VBAT, and that'll give voltage OSD information to the camera to display it. Since that's the only OSD I use, I don't use a board with Betaflight OSD, so again, I'm just going to make sure these are nice and long, have no problem to connect to each other. Okay, so the video system should now be all powered with the pod there, and then we'll still have, well, these will be able to tuck away when we put this down, and then we still have plenty of room to take this off again. So next I'm going to be mounting the receiver onto the flight controller here, because it's going to have to go on top of it up inside the pod. All I do is 5-volt in ground, and then the S-bus, I don't run the telemetry on it. So it's really simple. All we have to do is connect it to the over here on the left of the Hyperlite, the 5-volt in ground right there, and then S-bus RX1. So that's super simple. So it's just going to be black to ground, red to 5-volt, and the white to the S-bus pad. And I'm not exactly sure. I'm going to have to figure out how I'm going to mount this, because the flight controller needs to sit like this, so the receiver needs to go on top of it. So I'm going to double-side sticky tape it up here. But I need to be aware of the orientation, as then I'll have to run the antennas down to get into these tubes here. So probably a lot of this is going to be done off camera, as well as I'll probably leave everything long and just super quick connect it up so I have power so I can bind this, because it's going to be a pain to bind if it's in there. So yeah, let me do that. Okay, so I have the receiver mounted onto the flight controller, just some double-sided sticky tape, and there are the wires for that. And I did get this powered up and bound, so that's ready to go and stick up in there. So really, all we have left to do, I also added these little zip ties on the end here to help compress the TPU to hold the antenna tubes in. And the camera's up there. We have our wire already for that. All we have to do really is stick the antennas in here and put the flight controller up, and then really just sort of start wiring the motor signals up to the flight controller here. So let's get to work on that. So it should be good to go up in the top. I don't think I need to access it anymore besides this cable. Antennas through. The little holes there. There we go, and then just sort of bunch them up the rest of the way. Make sure they're not in the way of the screws. Then we have room for the camera cable to come out. There we go, they're all the way at the end. Then I'm going to use some little nylon washers to put the FC down, and for these screws they come down through the top here, and these ones are the metal ones that are included. They give you a big batch of screws, however they didn't have any metal ones long enough to come down from the front since it is thicker, so I had to use these nylon ones for that. Just getting the nylon washers on to hold the FC in place. And since this is directly mounting to the TPU, that should take care of all the soft mounting that you need. So that's really interesting. You don't have to use any extra vibration dampening, hopefully. And then when this is in place, I still should be able to stick a screwdriver in there and get access to the bind button. If not, I can just take this pod off, and we have access to the flight controller just like that, since I left a decent amount of room from the camera wires. So now the last thing to do is wire up the power to the flight controller, which is just the 5-volt and ground coming from the ESC here, and then that'll also power the receiver that we wired up. So this is just going to go, let me zoom in real quick. So the power for the flight controller is going to go over here on the pads that I already have tinned the 5-volt and ground. The ground is on the outer rail here. You can power it from any one of these, but I just like to do on motor 6 since it is farther away. And then for the signals, the white wires coming out of the ESC right here, we're going to wire them up to signal 1, 2, 3, 4, just like that. And they are labeled which is which if you look at the wiring diagram that came with the Spedix ESC. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, there I have that all wired up. You're probably bored of seeing wires soldered right now, so I just did that off camera. So hopefully you can see I just connected it up, just like I said, with the signals going right to there. There are no grounds in this. It's a 4-in-1. You don't need that, so you don't have to use those. And there's the power for the flight controller. And then the camera wires from the Vtx just go up behind that. And then obviously the receiver is contained above that. So all we have to do is put this antenna in between the tubes, stick that there, and then, yep, this fits down nice and good over that, nice and well. However you want to say that. And just sort of push the wires out of the way a little bit in there. Can't really see them too much. That all looks good and clean. So we are pretty much done here. Just have to zip tie this antenna to the back behind the canopy here, and then put these screws into this. And other than that, I think we are done. Spacer piece to fit down through, which there it goes. And of course, make sure you have the little washers and threaded inserts on the TPU there. So that's good. Tighten that down. I won't do it fully tight just yet, so that arm's in place. The other ones here. Okay, I have the canopy just sort of loosely on, so now I'm going to start to torque everything down. And these are 7075 aluminum screws, so don't go crazy tight on them. And they're just into the press fit nuts in the bottom. And obviously, if you were more of a beginner and you wanted more durability, I would recommend running this little crossbar across the front. But the main reason I didn't run it wasn't actually for the weight it adds. I just thought it looks so much better without the bar. It just looks super, super nice as is. I didn't run it, so if I break my front arms in a hard crash, that's on me. But from what I can see, this frame is going to be really durable with the 5mm arms. Okay, there, everything is tightened down, so that looks really, really nice. All that's left, the last final thing, is I just have to zip tie this antenna here to the back. So let me do that. And I'm not going to go super tight on this guy, just enough to sort of hold it in place so it can still wiggle around. I'm not sure in a crash how this is going to fare. It's kind of protected behind the canopy, but still if you land like this, boom, right on it. It's unprotected clover leaf, but we'll see how it goes. Maybe I can push it down just a little bit. So there we go. So there is the Catalyst Machine Works Merica build, all finished up and looking really nice and pretty. Let me clean up the workbench, and then we'll get some props, and we'll get a weight for it. Alright, so let's do a battery plug-in and see if we get the fateful smoke of death. However, I will be using this little smoke stopper from Race Day Quads. It's only a few bucks, so it's really nice to pick it up and protect your electronics. So I checked there is no shorts, but let's just use it anyways. There we go. We got lights flash from inside. Everything powered up fine. Good to go. Alright, so there we go. All finished up, and this thing is just looking gorgeous. Of course, the camera is blowing out this red pod. I just can't really deal with it, but it looks super nice in person. A nice cherry red there. The motor's looking really nice, and it just feels really lightweight overall, and with the super slim aerodynamic profile, it looks like it's going to be a beast in the air. So let's get a weight for this guy here. With the battery strap, everything as it would be ready to fly, minus your props, but I will add props in just a second. So it's 254 grams there, which is actually a really respectable weight considering this is using 2207 motors. And then if we add on a bag of props, we get 275 grams. So that's actually, even though the frame is a little bit heavier than my Mode 2 Ghost frame, it's actually a lighter 5 gram all-up weight, or a dry weight lighter than my Ghosts. And that's partially due to the fact that it's a really nice, tight, constricted build in the pod, as well as we're using this UFL antenna to the cloverleaf instead of using a UFL to SMA and then SMA to a circularly polarized antenna. So that's really nice. So let me just stick some props on just to see what it looks like. And I'm actually going to be hopefully using these props on it just real quick. These are the brand new HQ, I don't know where it is. There it is. If you can see it, the 5x5x3 V1S. And the big reason that I'm interested in running these on it instead of my more normal racing prop with the GemFan 5152 is that these are the 2700 kV motors, so they're going to be pretty amp hungry probably, especially their 2207. This is going to be a really insane setup. However, the battery might be an issue, so I'm hoping that these 5x5x3 V1Ss are going to be sort of a compromise, and that they're not going to have as good as top speed as the 5152 would. However, I'm hoping that they're still going to be very adequate and that they will reduce the amp draw enough for this to be a feasible setup. So I'll be curious to test that out. Alright, so there we go. That finishes up the build video for the Catalyst Machine Works Merica. There will be links down below to all the parts if you're interested, as well as I did a specific bench review of these motors, as well as the frame itself, so there will also be links down below. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.